Hello again, this is Rudy Giuliani, and I'm back with another episode of Rudy's Common Sense. Now, this subject is badly in need of common sense. It's badly in need of revision and limitation because it's about as far as I've seen this country go in the direction of fascism. And that is the creation, within only 5 days of considering the issue from a highly politicized organization, of a task force involving all 94 United States attorneys and numerous federal law enforcement agencies to consider federal prosecution of parents who are acting in what they regard as an unruly manner with regard to school boards when they're advocating for what they regard as the proper education of their children. This is a very frightening development. It should not be a surprise to those of you who have been listening to Rudy's Common Sense, because it's been developing since the beginning of this administration. And that is what I call the express train to socialism and Marxism. But socialism and Marxism with an authoritarian strain. We've pointed that out with the governors in the Democrat states who seem to be very prone to mandating rather than persuading. And the president now has shown that same tendency. He rarely, if ever, attempts to persuade. He dictates, he mandates, he commands. These are, of course, all the hallmarks of a dictatorship. In a democracy, we persuade. In a dictatorship, we dictate. And now we have probably the most distorted overreach of federal jurisdiction that I can ever remember, and what would clearly be something we have avoided for all the time we've been a republic, and that is a national police. But as you will see, it's not a national police to deal with the problems of violent crime increasing by record levels in all the Democrat cities, people being murdered, particularly African Americans, in huge, huge numbers, lives being lost and nothing being done about it. It isn't about that. It isn't about the illegal immigrants who have been coming in by the hundreds of thousands, among other things, spreading COVID without any accountability all throughout the country, as well as creating problems of disruption, and in some cases, problems of crime, not all. It's not about any of those things. It's about the school boards and parents who are upset about mandates for wearing masks for young children, mandates for vaccines for children, and mandates for just about everything else, as well as a complete distortion of the educational system with elements of critical race theory, the 1619 Project entering into the education of their children, and with a whole different view of sexual and gender education, which doesn't involve them at all. So let's take a look at that and see if we can analyze it again with common sense. The Biden administration has been a crisis a week and a catastrophe a month. And just in the last several weeks or months, we've gone through a recklessly executed withdrawal from Afghanistan, which possibly could be the worst chapter in our foreign policy in our history. We turned over billions of dollars of lethal weapons to a terrorist group that hates the United States. We abandoned an Air Force base that was 400 miles from China, our biggest future rival, if not present rival, and 500 miles from Iran, a country that's dedicated to destroying Israel and killing Americans and has killed Americans. We abandoned that base. We executed that policy by taking the soldiers out, the troops, before we took out the civilians and got them killed. has to be one of the blackest marks in American history. And Joe Biden promised to get all the Americans home, and then in a cowardly act, in an act of dishonor, broke that promise and left Americans behind, some of whom are still there, left behind Afghans who helped us, some of whom have been killed. It will live with Joe Biden for the rest of American history as one of the most dishonorable acts ever done by an American president. That's just in the last couple of weeks. We've also had the mass invasion of thousands and thousands of Haitians who were living in South America, who felt they were invited by Joe Biden to come into the United States. They came in a group of about 15 to 20,000, set up a Bidensville in Del Rio, Texas. A few of them were sent back to Haiti, a few were sent back to Mexico, but somewhere around 12 to 15,000 were sent to parts unknown in the United States to spread COVID. Yes, because they weren't tested and they weren't vaccinated, and the things that they are mandating, sometimes under penalty of criminal prosecution, now under real penalty of criminal prosecution, they just allowed these illegal immigrants to do. But it's worse than that 15 or 20,000. Since he's been in office, 1.5 million illegals have been apprehended. The rule of thumb is that for the number apprehended, about 50% elude the immigration service and come in completely undetected. And we send back about half. So let's do the arithmetic in the last month or two. We've been averaging about 200,000 a month that are apprehended. So 100,000 of those easily get through and are sent around the United States, unvaccinated, untested, as COVID spreaders. And then there are 100,000 that we never get to view, never get to look at, never get to see. I mean, they could be MS-13, they could be terrorists, they could be criminally insane murderers, they could be very fine people, or they could be extremely ill with COVID or diseases that come from the third world. We don't know. They're vetted by the Mexican cartels, not by the United States. And it shows the utter and crass hypocrisy of this administration with their very strict rules on COVID, that they've had hundreds of thousands of people traveling around the United States, unvaccinated, untested. The off-the-cuff estimate, and it's probably low, is that about 30% of them are infected with COVID. They have to be spreading it. And they have to be the biggest spreader of it since the Chinese sent their people here, and it's attributed to Joe Biden, and makes everything else they do hypocritical, including, of course, all of the hypocritical things they do where they don't wear masks, where they go to parties without being masked, and ordinary citizens, us deplorables, will get a ticket or scolded or maybe even arrested if we don't. I think now we can take a break. Big tech monitors us, censors us, deplatforms us. Conservatives have been helpless to do anything about it until now. On Getter, you can talk with friends and family and express your political beliefs without fear of Silicon Valley liberals coming after you. Join Getter, the social media platform that supports free speech and opposes cancel culture. Getter is led by former Trump advisor Jason Miller, who saw what big tech did to President Trump and decided to fight back. Getter is the fastest growing social media platform in history, with over 1.6 million users and growing, including prominent conservatives like Mike Pompeo, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Steve Bannon. Join Getter. It's in the App Store, the Google Play Store, and at Getter.com. Longer posts, longer videos, sharper and clearer pictures, and unlike the Silicon Valley oligarchs, Getter will never sell your data. Send a message today, join Getter. It's time to cancel culture. Let's continue. So these are the crises that we've had, and there are more. But the one we have right now may be the worst, because the one that we have right now goes to the heart of accelerating our express train to Marxism. Because if you can set up a secret police, if you can set up a centralized police and prosecutorial agency that you control for political purposes, you've gotten pretty close to a fascist state. Now, we've never had that. Our law enforcement is largely done at the state and local level, and we have always, both by constitutional law and just tradition, we have always resisted having a large federal police force or federal police presence. Well, that's all been thrown out now because one of the dominant political forces in the left-wing party that helped elect Biden and all these Democrats, the National Association of School Boards, called NSA, wrote a letter on September 29 to the president, the guy they elected. If you look at the spending of their money in their lobbying pact, it's basically all purely Democrat. And the letter, which I have right here, of September 29 is extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. It's asking for a federal investigation of allegedly harassment by parents of local school board members. They suggest in it that it's similar to domestic terrorism, and they also suggest that elements of the Patriot Act should be used in prosecuting these parents. And the Patriot Act was designed for homicidal terrorists and Islamic extremist assassins. And domestic terrorism, of course, is designed largely for people that are going to murder people, destroy things, bomb things. I mean, there's nothing like that here. Just like there was nothing like that on January 6th. There wasn't even a single shot fired. I mean, that was hysterical, created reaction to try to destroy Donald Trump. This is a hysterical, created reaction to try to create a federal police force to enforce their political views, because that's all this is. The letter didn't cite a single specific violation of federal law, yet it asked for a massive police effort to go after these parents. And what are these parents alleged to have done? Let me read a bit from the letter so we're not accused of misinterpreting. It's, of course, to Dear Mr. President from one of his strongest supporters, the NSBA. And they ask for federal law enforcement because of threats of violence and acts of intimidation. They talk about acts of violence affecting interstate commerce. Well, of course, that's not a federal crime. It has to be a very, very specific effect on interstate commerce. And schools have never been thought of as really being critical to interstate commerce. But there's no statute cited. They talk about attacks against school board members for approving policies for masks to protect health and safety. They talk about physical threats. And they claim just directly and falsely that critical race theory is not taught in public schools, for which there is a unbelievable amount of evidence, both documentary and testimonial, that it is taught and that all elements of it are taught, including teachers who have quit because they refuse to teach it. They then ask for the expertise of the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Secret Service, and the National Threat Assessment Center. And the classification of these heinous acts could be the equivalent to a form of domestic terrorism and hate crimes. And they want it reviewed under the Patriot Act in regards to domestic terrorism. Now let's see what these terrorists have done. Here are the examples now. These threats or actual acts of violence are impacting delivery of educational services, school board meetings have been disrupted. Oh my. In California, Florida, Georgia, and other states, because of local directives for mask coverings to protect students and educators from COVID-19. An individual was arrested in Illinois for aggravated battery and disorderly conduct during a school board meeting. During 2 separate school board meetings in Michigan, an individual yelled the Nazi salute in protest to masking requirements. Another individual prompted the ball to call a recess because of opposition to critical race theory. Somebody calls for a recess and that's an act of domestic terrorism, or yelling out a Nazi salute in protest to masking is domestic are they serious? We don't know what this aggravated battery was in disorderly conduct, but there's no mention of any prosecution or penalty for it. Then they list a number of other states, New Jersey, Ohio, other states. Anti-mask proponents are inciting chaos during board meetings. There are chaos during board meetings when taxes are raised. What are they talking about? Chaos. That's not domestic terrorism. This has got to be a joke from a highly partisan left-wing Looney Tunes organization, not the national association that represents school board. This would be a good time to take a short break. How much equity do you have in your home? 50,000, 100,000, more? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity you have, the greater the chance foreign and domestic criminals will come after you. Title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes. Home Title Lock, America's leader in home title protection, is alerting homeowners they could already be a victim and not know it. Here's how it goes down. First, cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. Next, they pull your home's title that's online. They forge your signature stating you sold your home, and they take out loans using your equity. You're not covered by insurance, your bank, or common identity theft programs. Protect your most valuable asset. Register your address now to see if you're already a victim and receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value free. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. That's HomeTitleLock.com. Welcome back. An individual was arrested. Another man was ticketed for trespassing, and a third person was hurt. They don't say, they say in Virginia. They don't say what the individual was arrested for. One was ticketed for trespassing, hardly domestic terrorism, and third person was hurt, but they don't say how hurt, because of objections to critical race theory. In other states, they mentioned 5 others, school boards have been confronted by angry mobs and forced to end meetings abruptly. So was I when I was the mayor and I had town hall meetings. I didn't have the people investigated as domestic terrorists. How about this one? A resident in Alabama who proclaimed himself a vaccine police has called school administrators while filming himself on Facebook Live. Now, what's wrong with that? Sounds like free speech. And if it's anything, it's harassment. That's domestic terrorism? Maybe the closest they get, but it's not domestic terrorism, is a single letter, a hate mail, in which it ends with a veiled threat. You are forcing them to wear masks for no reason in this world other than control, which is a reasonable proposition, by the way. And for that, you will pay dearly. A student in Tennessee was mocked during a board meeting. Now, there isn't a single thing in here that you could seriously consider anything approaching even a serious crime, much less domestic terrorism. You will pay dearly? Well, who knows what that means? That's so ambiguous. I mean, you think we'd put some Islamic terrorist in jail for writing that? My goodness, all these guys that defend the Islamic terrorists are being treated unfairly. So this letter is a joke. It is so out of line with something to write to an attorney general. And then I'm going to give you one other reason, because Garland is a lawyer and a judge. It doesn't give any basis for federal jurisdiction. If these things are crimes, and it's debatable whether they are or not, this is why we have state and local law enforcement. We don't have it for fun. Our system is a state and local law enforcement system by design, so we don't become a dictatorship. We have roughly 14,000 FBI agents and 800,000 uniformed police officers. You get the message? We diffuse law enforcement so nobody acquires massive law enforcement and prosecutorial power, because our founding fathers found that that was the clearest road to a dictatorship. So right now we've got an attorney general that's taking the clearest road toward dictatorship. Create a federal police that is designated to scrutinize what is very, very often protected First Amendment activity. And in a highly charged area, parents fighting for the protection of their children. This is extremely dangerous. They've done a number of dangerous things, this administration, but this could very well be the single most dangerous. When you co-opt the FBI and the Justice Department, and you make the Attorney General your political henchman for the bringing of investigations and prosecution, and for the use of the heavy arm of the law to dissuade people for fighting for their children, you've crossed the line. Now, just to indicate the enthusiasm with which Garland, who has not done a single thing about the extremely dangerous rise in violent crime since Biden has become president. I mean, record increases in murder in city after city that's run by Democrats. People being released from jail by 20 or 25 Soros-sponsored DAs in places where Soros has no interest other than to create chaos. So we become a one-world government. And why would they be interested in Soros? Because he's the biggest contributor to Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, the Black Lives Matter movement, which is the hate, kill police movement, and the Antifa, which is the hate, kill white people movement. Those are very interesting organizations that he sponsors. And then prosecutors who are supposed to protect us against organizations like Black Lives Matter and Antifa. He's the biggest contributor to prosecutors, and he's the biggest contributor to the organization that marches around the United States saying, pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. You know what that means? Kill police officers. And the prosecutors he gets elected are creating chaos, true chaos. And crime increases that these cities have never known, like in Philadelphia, like in Chicago, where even the mayor can't tolerate the district attorney, the one who fixed the Smollett case, the one who lets murderers go free. None of them prosecuted really a single one of the rioters in 2020. Those riots by Black Lives Matter resulted in over 25 homicides. Numerous police officers seriously injured, hundreds of civilians injured, and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, in businesses destroyed. Many of them for small businesses that have now gone completely broke. And basically what happened, they were all released by DAs put in there by Soros for the express purpose of letting criminals go free. And the ones who weren't released, bail was put up, sponsored by Vice President Kamala Harris, who maybe should get that fixed before she tries to do a makeover of her miserable personality. within 5 days of that extraordinary letter. I mean, it took 6 days for Biden to react to Afghanistan. It took 6 days for Biden to show up, get out of his basement, and react to Afghanistan. In 5 days, the Attorney General took the unprecedented step of responding directly to this Democrat organization, highly partisan Democrat organization, NSA, and immediately set up a nationwide task force, which will involve all 94 United States attorneys, that's the whole country, the FBI, the Secret Service, Homeland Security, and almost every conceivable unit of the Department of Justice to investigate what are purely local crimes. And then he gave them 30 days to get back to him with further recommendations for effective action. This is extraordinary. It's never been done before. Where does he get the right to do this? Where's the jurisdiction? There wasn't a single federal crime listed here. And when you look at his press release and his letter, it might as well be a rewrite of what the National Association of School Boards wrote. They got everything they asked. The whole thing. They got a little extra, too. They just set up a whole new federal law enforcement agency to protect school boards from domestic terrorists, parents of children in school. And we looked at the acts that they performed. What a case of intellectual dishonesty. What's caused this is that because of the pandemic and because of the teaching at home, a lot of what has been going on undermining education in this country has now come to the attention of parents, and they're shocked. I mean, and given the paucity of federal law, this extraordinary act on the part of the Attorney General makes it clear he's not a law enforcement officer. He's a political operative. This is a political task force, and its objective is to deter objections to their highly left-wing program, to deter objections to their mandates for masks, their mandates for vaccines, whether the mandates are supported by science or not, and to just comply like sheep with whatever the Democrat NSA wants, the unions, the Black Lives Matter, the left wings. I mean, it is to set up really a Marxist form of top-down government of a rather dictatorial nature. You know, these things that are being debated are not all that clear. Many countries, developed countries, with scientific knowledge equivalent to ours, have banned vaccines for children and of different age groups, some 18 and younger. So there is something to the concern that parents have. Also, it is completely irrational to not consider the people who have natural immunity. People who have natural immunity, from every study that I can find, most of which is suppressed, have a more effective form of immunity than people that are vaccinated. At least that's what most of the studies have shown. And even if it's an equal form of immunity, why should people who have that immunity have to take even the small risk posed by the vaccine? Let's assume they're correct and the vaccine just poses a small risk. It does pose a risk that many people find more than acceptable, similar to the kind of risk with other medications. But still, there are people who have become seriously injured from taking the vaccine and people who have died from taking it. Well, it's one thing for a person who's at risk of getting the illness to make the decision to take it and accept that small risk. It's another thing to force someone who is already immune, possibly even more effectively immune than the vaccine will provide, to force them with the authority of the law and even the criminal law to take a vaccine that can do them no additional discernible good, but can only do them harm. What's irrational about that decision? Why is that not a decision a person in a democracy should be able to make with their doctor? And what possible danger does a person who has natural immunity pose to anybody? And why should they wear a mask? Second, it completely eviscerates, completely throws away, completely destroys the constitutional and prudential prohibition against creating a national police. We have avoided a national police for all the years of our republic. With the terrible menace of organized crime, with the other things that have threatened our country, the drug problem, we've been able to maintain a close cooperation between state and federal law enforcement, but only where there was an overlap of criminal activity that violated the laws of both. Not a single federal statute is cited here, yet they're asking for hundreds of millions to possibly billions of dollars of enforcement money being spent on a non-federal, possibly non-problem, but a political effort that should be paid for by the Democrat National Committee to prevent debating their distortion of science and their bullying of the American people. If they can't keep COVID alive into 2022 and 2024, they may get wiped out so badly, they may have to go back and start to become a responsible political party again. Also, stop all the stealing they do. Number three, without the suggestion of any federal statute being violated, this massive effort becomes what? There's no federal statute here. So this is political investigation and prosecution. There isn't a hint of any federal jurisdiction that supports this extraordinarily broad statute with draconian penalties of the Patriot Act. What's it supposed to do? It's supposed to penalize parents for objecting to mandates for children to wear masks. Mandates to children to be vaccinated. When in other countries, those mandates in some cases have been removed and in some cases never imposed because they weren't considered to be necessary, because the incidence of this illness among children is so low, the fatality rates are even lower, and their ability to transmit it is much less than an adult. And therefore, the trade-off for wearing masks for an entire day for a child in school was considered to be actually more dangerous to the health of the child. Consider that children sniffle, children don't really have control over what they're doing quite the way adults do. By the end of the day, that mask could be spreading any form of disease imaginable. It's filled with diseases and germs and whatever else you want to call it. This might be a good time to take a short break. I accomplished a lot in 2020 exposing the truth, establishing the relationship with you, working tirelessly for America. and I came to know the work and value of the people at American Hartford Gold. You see, you buy gold not only for what you know, but you buy gold for what you don't know. American Hartford Gold is the company you can trust when it comes to buying gold. They sell physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or inside of your IRA. In the precious metals industry, they are the highest rated firm in our country with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied clients. Give them a call and tell them Rudy sent you. And be sure to ask them what I bought. And if you call them right now, they will give you up to $1,500 of free silver on your first order. Folks, these are uncertain times. The one thing you can count on to protect what you have worked so hard for is physical gold and silver. So don't wait. Call them now. Call 833-GOLD-777. That's 833-GOLD-777. Or text Rudy to 65532. Again, that's 833-GOLD-777. Or text Rudy to 65532. Thank you for returning. The same thing is true of the mandates for vaccines. First of all, none of the children are tested for natural immunity. If they have natural immunity, why would you put them through the risk of having a vaccine? I'm not saying the vaccine is unduly risky, but I am saying it's risky. Small percentages of people have died, and slightly greater percentages of people have become very, very ill. Why should a child who is not likely to get the disease, will almost definitely not be seriously affected by it? That doesn't happen until you're about 40 or 50 and with a comorbidity. Why should a child be subjected to that risk? Well, we haven't done enough testing on children to figure out what kind of impact it has on a young body. This is less than a year old. Why would you subject someone to a risk who's probably not going to get it and it's not going to be serious? And even if you're going to do that, why would you subject someone who has antibodies and can't get the disease? Just to say you gave him a vaccine or gave her a vaccine? Isn't that kind of the thing that marks a fascist government? I'm going to exercise control over you because I got control over your kid. And I'm going to jam them with that vaccine whether they need it or not. Even if in other countries they realize it's not necessary. Even if there's no science behind it. Don't tell me that Democrats have science behind what science, my you-know-what. This has been pure political, and the worst offender of all is Biden and Fauci. So that's the mandate thing. You object to mandates even if you have reasonable arguments about the child being immune or the child being under very little risk or having other reasons. You get a little too vociferous in your pointing out the illogic of their mandates for masks and vaccines. You could be subjected to the Patriot Act and classified as a domestic terrorist. Then we have the objections to the teaching of various CRT doctrines, critical race theory doctrines, and things borrowed from the 1619 absurd false history project of the New York Times. So there's a big debate about whether these things are taught in K through 12, and of course the lefties yell and scream that they're not taught. Where do parents get this if it isn't from critical race theory, if not taught as a law school subject? But elements of it, and the most pernicious elements of it, are taught all throughout our school systems. Or the evil nature of our founding fathers, who were made to be all races, even though half of them for abolition. and they were until now considered to be the creators of the longest surviving constitutional republic with the broadest safeguards for freedom and democracy in the world. Or when children come home and tell their parents, even in the first, second, and third grade, that the teacher told them not to get too locked into a particular gender. To kind of like consider their options as to whether they're male or female. And in some cases, it's gone so far as to recommend hormone treatment without the permission or the knowledge of the parent. And then finally, the failure to take account of the fact that American K through 12 public education is a big failure. Do you know where we rate in the world? You have any idea where we rate in the world? I have statistics that go back just a few years, but they haven't changed very much. Particularly with the pandemic, nobody's been in school. I mean, here's an article from 2018, why the U.S. spends more money on education and why it's falling behind so badly. So we spend the most, and in 2017, to show you where we are, on science, we're below, I can't count all of them there, but it looks to me like a dozen or more countries. In math, we're behind about 25 countries, and in reading, we're behind another 12 to 15 countries. This was in 2018. We'll put this up so you can see it. And then Business Insider, a year later, in going through another study, similar nature, found the U.S. to be 38th in math and 24th in science, but spent the most on both. So another reason why parents could be up in arms about schools who are teaching that America was founded as a slave colony, but not teaching real history, or teaching that white people are inherently all racist, but not teaching math, or teaching that our founding fathers were all evil, horrible racists, but not teaching science. They may be very upset that their children are falling way behind the children in Singapore, Japan, Estonia, Taiwan, Finland, Macau, Canada, Vietnam, Hong Kong, South Korea, Slovenia, New Zealand, Australia, Germany, Netherlands, United Kingdom, Switzerland, Ireland, Denmark, Belgium, Poland, Portugal, and Norway. We are doing better than Malta. So, is critical race theory taught in K through 12? Yes, it's taught in K through 12. Christopher Rufo of the Manhattan Institute reported just a few weeks ago that he's identified at least 30 school districts in 15 states which are teaching from a book known as Not My Idea, where it basically says whiteness leads white people to make deals with the devil for stolen land, stolen riches, special favors. In Cupertino, California, an elementary school required third graders to rank themselves according to power and privilege. In Buffalo, New York, students were taught that all white people perpetuate systemic racism. In Arizona, the state's education department sent out an equity toolkit so people could measure the level of bias and racism because the state remains strongly biased in favor of whiteness. Now, the nation's largest teachers union have endorsed the teaching of critical race theory. This was, it looks to me like July 6. The NEA adopted new business item, that's the National Education Association, which is part of the triumvirate of left-wing groups that controls American education. The NEA adopted new business item 39. It calls for the organization to defend the teaching of critical race theory. Let me read it to you so there's no doubt about it. It is reasonable and appropriate for curriculum to be informed by academic frameworks for understanding and interpreting the impact of the past on current society including critical race theory. And the next day, I think Randy Weingarten said it wasn't taught, even though it was authorized to be taught. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of parents talking about their children coming back with these stories, curriculum that has been taken from the schools that we've examined, that others have examined. It's just impossible to deny that critical race theory and outlandish, sick approaches to sexual education are being taught to many, many children in many, many public schools. And it is impossible to deny that our public schools are failures in comparison to the public schools around the world, even though we spend more money, which is extracted out of us by these unions. I mean, these are unions that are bloodsuckers. The NSA is really a trade group. And the amount of money that it spends is outrageous. It also has a sister 501c4 lobbying organization that smears all the Democratic politicians. So, don't think of it as some kind of altruistic educational association. Now, across the country, school board members basically treat the parents as, problems. They reflect that great Democrat Terry McAuliffe's dictum: parents should have nothing to do with the educational curriculum. So, what is the NSBA? Well, first of all, the 2019 conference, right before the pandemic, featured Angela Davis as their keynote speaker. This is a woman who bought and allegedly supplied the shotgun used by her Black Panther lover to kidnap and murder a judge. Davis's letter to her lover expressed unequivocal solidarity with the commitment of political violence, domestic terrorists. So she was a domestic terrorist, not the parents. They have domestic terrorists, they dress them, and they want to go after the parents. And here's what the NSBA, which wants to classify parents as domestic terrorists, has to say about Angela Davis, who truly is a domestic terrorist. She draws upon her own experience in the early 70s as a person who spent 18 months in jail and on trial after being placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. The NSBA is funded by dues that come from state school boards. They're paid for by local school boards. So, how about their officers, Garcia and Slavin, are paid outlandish amounts of money. Now, how about the state and local authorities stop taxpayer money being used to create a national political police force? How about they cut off taxpayer money being used to teach our young people that white people are all systemically racist and evil? How about our state and local governments cut off funding for an organization that wants to have our children in the 3rd and 4th grade doubt their sexuality, and then a little bit later take hormones so that they can change their gender? How about state and local governments cut off funds to an organization that wants to teach hatred of the United States of America and of the people who founded us, of the people who gave us our liberty, of the people who died to end slavery? Now, all of this is also exacerbated by something that is quite common in the corrupt Biden administration: money. So Garland is doing this. He supposedly has a hit list, by the way, a hit list of people he wants to get, all right-wingers. But this one may not just be a hit list of people want to get. If the critical race theory is taught in more and more schools, his son-in-law, who has contracts to teach it, will make millions and millions of dollars. Never disclosed to anyone. Sound like another Hunter Biden? Maybe after his son-in-law makes hundreds of millions from teaching CRT, he can start selling paintings too. And does he have some kind of arrangement with the former good judge? I had a very different opinion of this guy when he was held up. My view of him was he was a respected federal judge that got caught in a political situation that did have elements of unfairness to it. I don't know what I would have done as a senator. Now, if I ever had voted for him as a judge, I'd probably go to confession. This man has no understanding of the constitutional limitations that we exist under, and he also seems to have no ethics. To allow his son-in-law to be engaged in this business, to take this precipitous action in 5 days, to just mirror what this cheap little political organization wanted from him, shows me this is a man of no ethics, of no concern for the Constitution, and a pure opportunist. And whether he's involved with the son-in-law making all this money or not, it surely should have been disclosed before he sent out that extraordinary letter completely destroying the credibility of the great department that I spent 17 years working in, the Department of Justice. Can't imagine what Attorney General Smith would say. I can't imagine what Attorney General Levy would say. Those are the two attorneys general I work for. I can't imagine what Bobby Kennedy would say. Or Herbert Brownell. Can't imagine they would do this. This is not an attorney general. It's a political hack. Don't know the level of it or how far it goes. It goes far enough to destroy our Constitution. This has to be rejected. And don't be intimidated. Fight for your children. They shouldn't be subjected to this propaganda to make them into meek little socialists and Marxists so that they just go off like sheep to the slaughter, like we did during the pandemic. Bring them up to respect liberty and freedom. Bring them up to respect their own individual judgment. Bring them up to believe in God. Bring them up to believe in a higher authority than just these puppets who are holding public office. And bring them up to have their own conscience so they can look to it and say, I don't care what I'm told. I'm not going to be a German concentration camp guard. Well, there's a lot here to think about and a lot here to follow. And we'll be doing that in future podcasts and alerts. But of all the things that we've encountered so far, this is the most dangerous. And we have got to stand up to it and have the courage to stand up to it. The freedom we've been given requires sacrifices from all of us. We never know when and we never know how. But if we want to keep it, we've got to be prepared to make those sacrifices. This may be one of those times. Well, thank you very much for listening. Please contact me at rudyscommonsense.com, and we'll be back with another episode very shortly. Thank you, and God bless America.